without sight. Connect, collaborate, and create.
Hello and welcome to the Sound Without Sight podcast. This episode features a presentation and Q&A hosted by James Risdon. James is a professional recorder player and founder member of Paraorchestra. He is also the access lead at ABRSM and previously worked as the music officer at RNIB. As part of the celebration of 200 years of Braille, James takes a holistic look at how Braille music fits into the practices of a modern-day classical musician. He covers a range of topics, including sources of Braille music around the world, ways of getting music transcribed into Braille, and tips for making Braille music files as useful as possible. We hope you enjoy. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce professional musician, user of Braille music and access lead at ABRSM, James Risdon. Hello, James.
Hello, Jay. It's lovely to be here. And I can hear lots of people joining the meeting and leaving the waiting room. So welcome to you all. It's lovely to have you with us. Just 7 sleeps until Christmas. Thank you for making the time to be here. So I've recognised a few names. If you've heard me talk about Braille music before, I hope there's something new for you. And if you've heard it all before, apologies in advance, but hopefully the questions that people will ask will stimulate some really good discussion afterwards. So just firstly, a big thank you to Jay and Sound Without Sight for making this possible. This is the third in a sort of mini series on Braille music across the last few months. We've had a panel discussion, which I hope some of you have managed to have a listen to, talking about ways of learning music and some of the pros and cons of Braille music as against other formats. We'll cover some of that today. We had a fantastic session recently with James Bowden looking at one of the automated Braille translation packages, and I highly commend that to you. And again, I will touch on some of that content in a broader context. And then I wanted to talk, really, the substantive bit that I wanted to bring was about how to, I suppose, use Braille music as a tool and the things that we can do to Braille music to make it really usable and sort of customize it for our own purposes and our own particular use. So that's what I'd like to talk about today. I think I'm talking for about 40 minutes, is that right, Jay? 45 minutes, something like that?
Yeah, that would be perfect. Leaving a good amount of time for Q&A.
Yeah, and we've got lots of time for Q&A. So what I thought it would be interesting to do to start with is to maybe, if you're able to and you'd like to, put where you are from in the chat. Maybe you're from, and I'm not thinking like Birmingham or Sheffield, I'm thinking which country you're from, because Braille music is a truly international code, and we all belong to a sort of global Braille music community. And I thought it'd be really lovely to see where people are joining from this evening. So yes, and please put your questions in the chat. Jay will mop all of those up while I'm talking, and we'll get to some of those questions a bit later on, and you'll have the chance to put your question live. It's a terrifying process, this. Just before we get started, I don't know if anyone else has done these sort of webinars, but you can't really tell who's on screen. You can't tell if people are sort of engaged or nodding off or have left or anything like that. So it's a relatively sort of terrifying process and a lonely process being out here in front. So anyway,
well,
I hope you enjoy.
James, I'll do the best to bridge the gap. So we're getting some responses in the chat already. So we've got Ella from Canada. We've got
Ella,
Ruben from the US, Karen from the US, Emma from Sweden, Sophie from the UK.
Yeah. Great. So we're already an international gathering, and it's lovely to have some people live that we only ever see on email lists. Right. Okay. Without any further ado and waffle, let's get started. We sent a handout round. You're welcome to follow the handout if you'd like to sort of keep track of where we are. If you want to make some notes, that's absolutely fine. If you want to write in the handout and keep it for yourself, that's absolutely fine as well.
And also do share what you're writing in the handout. So
yeah,
we can
if you'd like to share what you're writing.
Master copy.
Yeah. Unless it's, will this man ever shut up? Right, okay, so the first bit I wanted to talk about is Braille as a tool. And I've been listening back to the panel discussion in the summer and have lots of interesting conversations about Braille over the years. I am not a person who immediately took to Braille music. I got a long way down my musical pathway before realizing that music could be written down, or realizing that if you did write music down, it could in some way be helpful. So I had a pretty much grade 8 recorder and grade 7 clarinet before I read a note of music in notation. It was only when I came to do A level that I had set scores to study and needed to learn pretty quickly. And I think the thing that I realize now with hindsight is that it actually wasn't Braille music I was needing to learn. It was actually music and music theory and, interesting things like beat division and how to read rhythm and how to read pitch and intervals and how music works. And that was probably the bit of my musical education that was lacking. I think, like possibly a number of blind people, I made relatively quick progress working orally on an instrument. I was lucky enough to find an instrument I took to. So I made pretty good progress. And I don't think people worried too much about the fact that I didn't really know what I was doing. And that persisted really until A level. To cut a long story short, I closed a circle and went a complete 180-degree turn by ending up working at RNIB for nearly 10 years in the music advisory service, which was absolutely wonderful fun. And I took I suppose, a bit of a lead on Braille music because it was something I knew natively, supporting parents and teachers, producing resources. We used to work on producing specimen questions for GCSE and A level and specimen scores in 3 parts. We used to administer the Gardeners Trust Music Literacy Awards, which are still going and actually thriving and have been revised recently. So we used to go around the country talking to young learners of Braille music. So in a way, I've come a full circle. And potentially, like someone who's given up smoking, I'm a bit of a reformed character. But I do come with that background of being an entirely oral learner. And I remember very well what it's like to pick up a piece of Braille and have no idea what to do with it or how to make any use of it. So I hope that's a helpful kind of context setting before we start. So Braille music as a tool follows on from really what I was saying. Using Braille music is not a binary decision. It's not a yes, I'm going to use Braille music or no, I'm not. It might be something that you do. It might be something that you don't, depending on the context, the kind of music you're using, whether you can get hold of a score, whether you've got time to learn it, what you want to do with it. So using Braille music is basically something that is a kind of it depends scenario rather than a yes or no. Whether or not to use Braille music, I don't think is dependent on the genre of music. Braille music works whether you're playing jazz or folk or learning a rock song or learning a part to a symphony. It's arguable that Braille music is better suited to certain types of music because of the kind of music that was around when Louis Braille invented the code. So if you're looking at particularly experimental music, unconventional notation, it doesn't necessarily work as well. It can work, but it's not necessarily as fluent. And I would say, having done all of those genres, there's a good argument that folk music is really best done when it's part of an oral tradition. And as soon as you start to write down folk music or jazz music or vocals in a rock song, you lose quite a lot of the essential elements that make it distinguishable and make it what it is. So Braille music works whatever you're doing, but whether music notation is the best tool for the job that you're doing, I think is a more valid question. Braille music, I wanted to put this. Braille music is neither easy nor complicated. I can't claim this idea quite as my own. It's adapted from a chat I was having with the teacher Paul Harris, who's a clarinet teacher and has written several books on teaching. And he says, and I tend to agree, that nothing is really difficult or complicated, because if you know how to do it, it suddenly becomes easy. So eating fire or standing on your head or doing the vault or flying an aeroplane into London City Airport is not difficult if you've had the right training and you know what you're doing. But if you've never done it before, or you are only partway through your training, it might seem like quite a daunting thing. I think this is really important for us in the way that we talk about Braille music, because so often there is a kind of negative air and tone that goes around with Braille music among learners, among teachers, parents, other musicians, to say, oh, it must be terribly complicated and it's really difficult. That might stem from some bad teaching or some only partial teaching. It might stem from the fact that, it just didn't suit what you were doing at the time. But I think if we are to help Braille music survive and to encourage its adoption and encourage development in software and among publishers and all the work that we're going to talk about, we need to be our own best advocates, and we need to be talking about Braille music in very positive terms. We need to acknowledge where it is difficult and the fact you've got to memorize what you're playing. But I think we would serve ourselves well in this 200th anniversary if we start thinking about music and talking about Braille music in much more positive terms. So that's my sort of clarion cry for the evening. So that's the first sort of introduction. I'll talk now about sources of Braille music. When I and Jay started talking about this handout, I'd done a series of talks for the Paraorchestra, of which I'm a member, on Braille music over the summer. And in the handout, you'll see some links. I started to put together some links to existing sources of Braille music, because obviously the first question is, well, what's available and how on earth do you get hold of it? And in some ways, the answer to that question hasn't really changed in decades, but in some ways, it's fundamentally revolutionized. And as we go through this list on the handout, you'll see why. So I've put the first heading as the UK, and probably in the UK there are two main sources of Braille music: the RNIB library, rniblibrary.com, I think will get you there, and the Golden Chord catalogue. Golden Chord was a transcription agency, for those of you outside the UK, who produced several hundred works, probably over 600 items in the catalogue, by a remarkable transcriber, Roger Furman, who closed the agency a year or two ago, but the collection is still available to purchase via a company, and we've put links in the handout. The RNIB library is phenomenal. It's full of everything that people have requested. So actually, as well as a few core works, it's like a sort of record of what blind people in the UK have been requesting to play. And you can almost track individual musicians through little corners in the collection. So you'll find that there are an incredible number of guitar pieces, and there are an incredible number of flute pieces, recorder pieces, clarinet pieces, with a few exceptions, very much focusing on vocal, wind, and a few sort of upper string and piano pieces. There is not a kind of uniform collection across all instruments and across all pieces. It's very much a kind of, this has been requested, so it's now in our library collection. Some of the links I haven't used, but in the summer I worked with a fabulous musician that I've been privileged to get to know, George Gonçalves from Portugal. And he's a remarkable musician, not only for his pianistic skills, but also because he's studied and worked in so many European countries. And he has made incredible use of several libraries across Europe. The Association Valentin Huy in France is a library that he recommends, and the links in there. In Italy, the Library of Monza is there with an email address. Again, George would say that those libraries have really served him well as a pianist and are well worth looking at. There is a list further down in the handout, a list of organizations that we pulled together, actually when I was still at RNIB, of all of the organizations around the world, as far as we could manage, who have Braille music collections. And it's a pretty good list still. It's not necessarily been checked every 6 months like it was initially, but there are some really useful email addresses and suggestions of what's available. I would suggest for any of us, having those email addresses to hand and having that document bookmarked in our browser is a really good thing to do. The Nota library in Denmark, I'm not sure if I put the link in here actually, but again, has been absolutely fantastic and will send you scores on a CD-ROM. The library in Japan is mentioned here. There are probably other collections that aren't in here, and in your own handout, you can add your own links. You're very welcome to add suggestions, and Jay and I will update this list and make sure that that's shared around. There's a remarkable collection in China through Haipeng, who has been starting to translate not what people want, but actually work on core repertoire. And he has tackled some incredibly huge and complex orchestral scores and made dozens and hundreds of them available in the Braille Orch project. It's a remarkable collection, and browsing it is just one of those experiences that makes you think, all my life I've been wondering where I'm going to get hold of Braille. And now suddenly, in my mid-40s as I am, I'm shifting to thinking, how am I ever going to have time to read and study and peruse all of this? There is far more Braille available than I will ever get time to look at and study. And I hope that's encouraging. So that's the where to get hold of Braille, of existing collections. There are, of course, some email lists. There's a fantastic forum on Sound Without Sight. There's a Braille music chat list and a Vibe music chat list here in the UK. There are probably other places around the world where you can contact other users and put a call out for things that you want. I want to go on now to talk about how and where to get hold of Braille music. And the handout is pretty comprehensive, but I wanted to look really at the main ways that we can obtain Braille and discuss some of the pros and cons, or the ho-ho-hos or the no-no-nos leading up to Christmas. There are quite a lot of different approaches. And I think as a professional musician, or even someone studying music, it's good to think about these and think, now, which approach is going to be best for me, knowing that I've got this gig coming up in February, or I've got this piece I need to study in March. So the first, I'm not going to read all of this verbatim, you can read it yourself, but the first one is finding an existing transcriber. Now, obviously that can be really quick. If you know where to look and they happen to have the piece that you want, it can be a really quick, often very cheap and very easy process. The cons, it might take a bit of time to find. You might be sending off lots of emails to libraries around the world. It might take a long time to find. It may not be quite the edition or the arrangement, etc., that you want. It may take time to arrive. It may not be quite in the format that you want. It might only be available on paper, and you might really want it electronically. But it's a really good option, and I would say probably the first thing to look at if you're looking for a piece of music. Next one, commissioning a transcription. So if it doesn't exist, let's get this piece into Braille. You can contact your local organization. That might be RNIB in the UK. There are many other transcribers around the world. In the United States in particular, I think there's a pretty thriving network of freelance transcribers, less so in the UK now. There may be other freelance transcribers overseas that you can use. You don't have to be sitting in a room with someone to do this. So that the advantages, you can obtain the piece you need. You might be able to stipulate certain aspects of how the transcription is done. So you might say, actually, I only need the second movement of this piece. I don't need it all done. Or I only need the second violin part because I'm not doing anything else. Or you might say, actually, I really need all the cues, and I really need the percussion part because I play against the percussion part in this piece, and it's really helpful for me to know what's going on in there. So can you do me that? And by the way, I don't want any of the X, Y, or Z of the piece, so you can just leave that out. Most transcribers, if they're not putting it into a library, they're just doing a job for you, will happily, give you a custom-made transcription. It might be a very quick turnaround. Many transcribers are pretty quick and efficient at turning things around, in my experience. So what might be one of the cons? Well, it might be a costly option. Transcribing music is a specialist skill, and of course we need to pay people for their expertise. May not be possible in the time scale that you need. Well, that's possible. It's a really good option, particularly if you have funding, and it might be the only option to you if the piece doesn't exist already. So next one, and this is something I've done increasingly for more complex music, where there's no other option, working with a scribe or a support worker. So it might be that you're starting from scratch here. And, many of us who were brought up before the wonderful age of automated transcription that we live in now actually remember taking dictation from people and training them up into how Braille music works. So they know that we need an octave sign before certain notes. They know that we need dynamic markings or articulation marks before a note. And we know that we need sort of bracket slurs before a note. And they know what order things come in. Once you've trained someone how Braille music works, it can actually be a pretty quick process. And I've heard of people saying that they can't actually read the music out as fast as a blind person is taking it down. And if you're using a tool like Duxbury, other Braille music editors exist, it can be a really efficient way of getting something in that you can tidy up later. It might also be a really good option if you're learning something that's really complicated, for which you may have used an automated transcription package like SoundWide Braille or Goodfeel, but actually what has come out doesn't really make sense, and there are quite a few holes, and there's things that you need to tidy up. It might be that you're using, working on a completely graphic score with just squiggles and lines and colors. So working with a support worker, someone who knows music that can help you make sense of what you've got, is a really powerful tool. One of the great advantages is that you can do it whenever you want. You can work with someone overseas, you can work online. You can take down the details that you need. Again, you can end up with a customized score that may not exist in a library. The cons can be a time-consuming piece. It can take a couple of hours to get a piece of music down, maybe even longer. You need a good system for dictation, and ideally someone who knows the code, as I've said. So it's not a particularly efficient way of doing things if you're working with someone who has no idea what you need in what order, because you're forever rubbing things out and backspacing and deleting over stuff. But it's got me out of a lot of trouble. And once you've got a couple of people like that, they're worth their weight in gold. It's particularly handy in the Horses for Courses section. I couldn't think of a musical equivalent of Horses for Courses. Someone could put something in the chat. It's really handy if you're rehearsing a piece and workshopping it, and then it's likely to change. So if it's a really good way of capturing changes that happen to a piece, perfect for a short piece you need quickly. And yeah, so it might work as a combination. So you might have a long piece that you put through a transcription tool. Most of it's work, but there's a few things that are missing and you need to sort of tidy some details up. The last one is kind of really exciting, obtaining source files of printed notation to transcribe yourself. Now, I would say probably 10 years ago, this option wasn't really viable, didn't really exist. Certainly when I was growing up, it wasn't really possible. And in fact, until MuseScore really turned the world of online notation files upside down, ISMLP or IMSLP was really the only source of online scores we had. But of course, a lot of them were in PDF and so not particularly useful to us. It's worth saying in passing that there is now the facility for people to upload music XML files to IMSLP. So it's certainly worth a look. So how can this work? Well, there's various ways. Instead of commissioning a transcription, you might find a file on somewhere like MuseScore, from which you can obtain a music XML file, from which you can obtain a Braille file. You might be lucky and find that the score that you need is already online. You might also, and this is something that I've also done, and I'll talk a bit about this in a minute, you might just go directly to the publisher and say, hey, Boozy and Hawks, hey, Hal Leonard, I've got to learn this piece. I see you publish it. Is there any chance of having a notation file? That might have sounded ludicrous 10 years ago. Going to the publisher now has been something that has opened up because of the fantastic work, which I'm delighted to be a very small part of, managed by Sarah Morley-Wilkins of the Daisy Music Braille Project, part of the Daisy Consortium. This project has done incredible work over the last few years for all of us who have any interest in Braille music, from automated transcription to libraries sharing their scores and cooperating and collaborating with each other to minimize duplication, to now coordinating the snazzy titled Accessible Music Publishing Action Group, or AMPAG, which sounds like some kind of American airline, I think. Anyway, it's doing fantastic work. It's brought together many of the biggest publishers in the UK, including where I work at ABRSM, and is looking at the question of how do we as publishers make music XML files available to customers to use to turn into their accessible format of choice. And how do we also make sure that when we do share these files, however we're going to do that, that the file is what Sarah calls born ready. That means as much use as possible. So we know it's been produced according to the guidelines which have been produced for music engravers, so that when we get our Braille music score, all of our signs are magically in the right place and we don't have floating dynamic marks in the middle of nowhere, and we don't have crescendos that sort of appear out of nowhere and go nowhere. And we have all of our titles and our performance directions in the right place. So going to your publisher now is a very, very feasible option. And I would encourage people to start going to the publishers directly, because we need to tell them that there is demand for this. There's a lot of work going on behind the scenes, and we need to tell publishers that there is demand for this. We are able to look after music XML files. We're not going to make them available, and it's revolutionizing how we can work. I've done this with several publishers over the past year and have had incredible results and incredible positivity. You know, people saying, oh, don't, you know, tell me how you get on. If there's anything we can do to make these better, please say, you know, tell me about what you're doing. And in one case, don't even bother buying the print book, because I know you can't use it. You know, I know you've offered to, and that's wonderful. But, you know, for the sake of $6.99, have the music XML file. If it works, we know we're doing a great job and we can build that into our process. So I would encourage everybody to start doing this as a matter of course. And the AMPAG project will continue, I'm sure, to bear fruits in 2025. So those are the kind of main 4 ways I go about getting music, and I hope there's some helpful stuff in the handout I've skipped over. I was just going to touch very, very quickly on an overview of available automated tools. James Bowden did a fantastic session, and I hope, again, you go and listen to it on SMB. just to say that SMB is probably seems to be the leader in the pack at the minute, but there are other options available. There's the Make Braille system from DZB Lesen in Germany, the German Central Library for the Blind. Does a really, really great job. They've got automated scanning and conversion tools really sorted, and the results, I think, are brilliant. It's a system that emails you your score once you've got to log into the website. So it can take a few minutes longer. It's not quite the absolute instantaneous result you get with SMB, but it's pretty good. Goodfeel is still available and continues to be available in the US and Canada, Australia, and in particular, I think it's very popular. It's certainly been a tool that I've relied on for the last 15 years. It gives great results. It's probably out of the box the most accessible and the best supported of all of these products, I would say. And a shout out to Bill McCann, who has dedicated his life really to supporting those of us using Braille music conversion tools. And it's worth remembering that he was doing this in the 1990s before anyone thought it was possible or really a good idea. So a big shout out to Goodfeel. SMB, giving really great results. And the good thing is that all of these are now working to established requirements. So part of the DAISY Consortium project is that they did a big survey of what people need from these tools and what features people need and what support needs to be wrapped around them. So these projects, there have been over the years many products started, and not all of them have come to fruition or have hit the sort of difficult part of Braille music conversion and then sort of stopped. So we've only included here the ones that are really well supported and I think do a really great job. I think the link is in the notes, but there's a really great document that James Risdon put together, which is on the UCAF website. It's linked in the document, which summarizes all of the online tools and how to get started with them, what support you can expect, and a sort of overview of how they work. So I really highly commend you to download that file and keep it somewhere on your local computer. There's also a growing hub on the Sound Without Sight of Braille music articles and tools, and we'll try and put some more up there in this bicentenary year. So do bookmark that as well. Just wanted to finish in the last sort of, 12 minutes on some of the tips I use for making Braille music files as useful as possible. We touched earlier, the files you might get from a library in an existing collection may or may not be exactly what you want. I've heard lots of Braille musicians say, well, I would use Braille, but when I'm singing in a gig or when I'm in a rehearsal, I just can't follow the score quickly enough. I can't find what I need. There's too much stuff I've got to skip over. It's double-sided, it's single-sided, it's double line spaced, it's single line spaced. There's too much clutter. I can never find rehearsal letter Z when I'm asked to go there. I can't find bar numbers. There's all sorts of stuff. So my response to this, which really started when I was working with Sally Zimmerman at RNIB, is let's make Braille more usable. Let's make it easier to read. So here are some tips that you can look in the handout afterwards. So first thing, Braille music doesn't have to be the full score. That might sound really obvious, but it might just be the running order of your set. Andre touched on this in the discussion in the summer. Can't remember your song list? Well, just have them in Braille. You might have the key signature or the opening bar or two or first chords of the piece just to give you a reminder. Might be the first line of lyrics and a key signature. Might be sections of a huge long piece that are just difficult to remember, that you can never quite get your head around. Might be sections that are difficult to learn by ear. So it might be that you've been given a mock-up recording from Sibelius or YouTube and you just can't hear it. So you just use that bit in Braille, take that one sheet with you, not the 25 pages of the whole score. Might be that you've got the full score. If you're leading a workshop or teaching something, it might be that you've got the full score of this orchestral symphony, but only for the first sort of 16 bars or the first subject or, whatever you need. So it doesn't have to be the full score. For learning and memorizing, how we learn and memorize is probably a topic in itself, but I think it's absolutely critical to how we interact with our Braille. And it's, of course, individual to all of us. So some of the things in here you might think that's a jolly good idea or that's a load of rubbish. That's fine. But here are some general things I've found helpful. So think about the architecture of the piece. Leave a blank line between sections of the piece, for example, between movements or changes in tempo or time or key signature, so that you can find the section that goes into F sharp minor. Start new sections or movements on a new page, or separate them with a tactile line. We use the colons, the middle C's here in the UK quite a lot. So make your score as obvious as it can be so that when you're looking at it, you think, oh, I can see now I've got 5 sections. I've got one section in C minor, one section in C major, and one section in E flat major, or whatever it happens to be. Much easier to see at a glance what you're dealing with. Reference points. Make sure that you can find your reference points as quickly as possible so that when your conductor says, can we go from 16 before C, you can find that in the time that everybody else can. You don't need to say, oh, could you just give me a bit of time? I can't find it. Where is it? You can find your reference points and become familiar with where they are. Make sure that these are easy to see. So they might be on a new line. They might be indented. They might be centered as they are in SMB. Structure of the piece is really important. So consider using layout to distinguish between, say, verses and choruses in a song, or solo and tutti passages in a concerto, or whatever it happens to be. Put each new entry on a new line. So if you've had 58 bars rest, don't put your next entry halfway across the next line, because you probably put your score down, had a swig of tea if you're like me, or even a quick biscuit, and you need to pick up your score and find where you're next in. It's really helpful if that's easy to find. Sequences and patterns. A lot of us who are visually impaired love a good sequence and a good pattern, and music is full of them. And it's worth saying that print music doesn't really make much of a virtue of these. You won't find these highlighted in yellow or paginated in print because sighted musicians don't necessarily need to know them, and they're visually probably more obvious. But use layout to highlight these where they're really obvious so that you can memorize them easier. So consider using your own conventions, such as repeating specific bars. So you could say, you can put the numbers in the lower cell of the cell. So bars 56 to 83 just comes back here, and then you don't have to read it again. Really easy to follow. Use the convention of going back X bars and repeating Y bars. That's really helpful. Might not be in the original transcription, but if it helps you recognize a pattern, that's really helpful. You can, of course, do that with octave signs. So if you have a 4-bar phrase that you then repeat 2 octaves higher or an octave lower, you can just use the octave sign. Many transcribers don't necessarily think to do that. Consider using indented paragraphs where you're repeating sections. And consistency. If something's happened before, make sure that when it happens again, that it's laid out in the same way, because that instantly makes you think, I've had this before. And this bar, this sequence, there's a tie at the end of the line. And I remember that, it's a 2-line phrase and it starts here and it finishes halfway on the second line. If it's paginated and laid out differently, I find it's much more difficult to recognize that for what it is. Cues and notes. Sometimes we might find cues written in our piece, but consider adding in more. If there's a particular cue that you need to know when to come in, rather than having 16 bars rest, write in the cue. You don't have to write in notes. You could just write plonk, 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 using stem signs. You could write in notes, or sometimes I've just written like big cymbal roll or something like that. Just something that gives you an audio cue of where you are. Blind teachers working with sighted students, obviously it's really helpful if you've got the same edition as your student. That goes without saying. And often in Braille, we've been several editions behind the print. So we're telling the student to go to the 3rd bar on line 3, and it's actually on line 2 or something like that. But if you don't have the same edition, then try and find some common reference points, and you can get your student to write these in pencil. So you can make your score according to where you want your student to start from, or highlighting musical features in the grade 3 piano piece you're teaching them. And you can get them to put something in pencil or highlight on their score. So you've got a common point of reference rather than wasting your time trying to find a convenient place to start from. Obviously, for blind teachers and blind students, that's quite a common setup. Obviously, in this scenario, it doesn't really matter which score or edition you've got, as long as you're working from the same material. And you can produce custom files with custom signs or signs left out, or helpful hints and annotations put in. So that's a real whistle-stop tour. I'm going to stop talking in a minute, partly because my voice is going and partly because there's probably loads of questions and want to get into the conversation. But I hope that's just given you a flavour that Braille music doesn't have to be what you get off the shelf. It doesn't have to be what you get from your transcriber. I spend a lot of my time fiddling around in Duxbury, trying to make my score as optimized as possible for rehearsal, for leading workshops, or for memorizing. And I find that actually isn't wasted time. It might seem like a lot of time, but engaging with the score in that detail actually is a really crucial part of being able to learn it for me. So I do a lot of my learning and my memorizing with my fingers on the Braille display, so that when I come to pick up my instrument, I'm already familiar with how it goes, familiar with which bits I need to sit down and play in my instrument. So it's a technique I've sort of developed over the last 15 years since the technology has allowed it. And I found it really helpful. And I have to say now, I almost never use a transcription that I've got off the shelf from RNIB. I've got a whole bookshelf next to me of books. I keep them for reference. But if I want to do something, I try my best to get the electronic file and print out myself. And on that note, just to finish, a plug for those people in the UK. There is funding available for young people up to the age of 19, and again for adults pursuing musical careers and study, for the funding of specialist equipment. And wouldn't it be lovely in this bicentenary year if we were to receive a number of bids asking for Braille embossers and Braille displays and that kind of thing. So that's me finished with the content. We're going to finish with a bit of music later on, but let's open it up, Jay, to some comments and questions and virtual Rotten Tomatoes.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you so much, James. Super interesting and a real kind of whistle-stop tour, as you said.
Sorry, it was a bit quick, sorry.
No, totally. We brushed on so many amazing topics that I'm sure we'll delve into a bit more in the Q&A sure. Now. So just starting off with, it's a bit of an open question, a really interesting one, actually. So it's from Adele. Adele is asking, well, kind of highlighting the kind of chicken and egg nature of learning Braille music and using automated tools. And I guess the specific question is it necessary to learn and be able to read Braille music before you go looking at an automated tool like SMB or Goodfeel or something like that? Or can those tools help you to learn Braille music to begin with?
That's a great question, Adele. And I'll be really honest, I don't think many of us have actually thought of these tools in terms of tools for learning. But of course, yes, you're absolutely spot on, because if someone were to put a scale of C major into MuseScore and you export it and you turn it into Braille automatically, you've got yourself what a C major scale looks like. There's a little caveat insofar as I think it's helpful to know how the system works rather than trying to second guess what you're reading. So what an automated tool like Goodfeel or SMB will give you is the result of a print notation. It won't necessarily tell you what you've got under your fingers. So you're going to have to either deduce it for yourself or work it out for yourself. I think it's a really helpful approach, but you might want to also invest in a little Braille music crib sheet. There are various ones around, and anyone will probably be able to produce one of the basic signs and work your way from there. And once you've got a little bit down that road, of course, there's the full work, depending on where you are. There's the New International Manual of Braille Music. There's a whole Braille Music reference work in the US, and I've completely forgotten what it's called. Someone will tell me. So there are reference works like a dictionary. I suppose it's a bit like saying, if I buy a dictionary, will it help me to learn to read? And of course, it's part of the jigsaw, but it's not necessarily all you need. I would suggest finding yourself either a Braille tutor book or finding yourself a teacher online, or just someone to have a Zoom call with who can tell you. I reckon in half an hour, I could probably give you all you need to get started so that you could start reading some, basic tunes.
So there was a follow-up, not from Adele, but related to that. Learning Braille in the first instance, Braille music, how can I go about finding a teacher? And that was an anonymous question.
This is a great question, actually. And as it happens, I think there is some progress on this, Jay. So what I know at the minute is that this has been an ongoing question and it's not been easy. So until now, your best bet is probably word of mouth, maybe going to Jay and Daisy at RNIB, maybe getting yourself on an email list, doing a Google search. We are looking at getting together a directory of teachers who are able to teach Braille music. There are a few around in the country. And it's a really, really important part of the sort of landscape, actually, because some people just learn better by being told and being taught and working with someone. Other people, want to be given a reference book and are quite happy to read the instructions and go away and figure it out for themselves. So some of the best Braille musicians I know claim never to have been taught any Braille music. They just learnt it themselves. That's fine. If you want a teacher, it's great to be able to find one. I think Sound Without Sight would probably be able to put you in touch with teachers at the minute, but we are looking at having a directory, and musicteacher.com is a directory of teachers who are now able to certify whether they have experience of teaching blind people, including Braille music. It's quite a small directory at the minute, but it's likely to grow. There are initiatives like that. And I think if you were to contact someone like the Independent Society of Musicians in the UK, which is like the specialist professional body of music teachers, they would be able to use their networks to find someone who is registered with them.
Yeah, totally agree with all of that. And I think, this is a question that's been kind of front and center for me at Sound Without Sight and at RNIB. How can we work with partners to make that easier to find teachers? And things are in the works, and I hope to be able to share more on that soon. But as an interim solution, it's great to have a mainstream teacher network such as musicteacher.com, seeing the value and making it very easy for teachers to self-certify. Yes, I can teach Braille. Like James says, that literally just came out last week, so I'm not sure how many there are on there yet. Possibly none at this very, very early point in time. But at least teachers can say, this is something that I can offer. And I very much hope that we see more in time. So we've got a hand up from Christina.
I had a quick question. Very good what I caught about the Braille music. I have just some dot formations of the music Braille. Would that be a good way to start too? I already have like dot formations that I've recorded from somewhere else that I got them from.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think use whatever you can glean from places. It sounds like you're the other side of the Atlantic, Christina. So
yeah, I am. I'm in US of A, and I come to everything in UK as far as Braille.
Fantastic. There is, as far as I'm aware, a number of people in the US who would be more than happy to help you. Bill himself, we've already mentioned, but there are, I'm pretty sure there's it used to be called Menvi. I don't know if it still exists. Probably does, which is the music education network for the visually impaired. Is probably a good place to start. There are some good, you'll probably find some local email lists and people, but I think if I were you, I'd be going to Menvi and Dancing Dots first of all, and they will probably find someone or be able to point you in the right direction. And there are some publications that they've already done over there if you're the kind of person that likes a book.
You said Menvi? I've never heard of that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's still going. If it is, we'll make sure it's in the revised handout.
It is still going. Actually, this came up recently.
Menvi.org.
So there's a link on Sound Without Sight actually. So if you go onto our discussion forum page, it's one of the external groups that we link to on there.
Oh, okay, thank you.
We'll make sure it's also in the handout for this because it's relevant for this as well.
Okay, thank you so much.
No, you're welcome. Thank you for joining us. It's lovely to have you.
Thanks, Christina. So next, I wanted to go to Maria Louise. So Maria Louise, I know you sent in some questions ahead of time, and also you've put some more in the chat. So if I just open up the floor to you.
Hi. I think I sent a very long list of questions, but I can do it really shortly actually. But it's because I'm a student and my teachers are really bad at providing me stuff, like even though it's music XML files. So it's pretty difficult for me to do anything. And the thing is that I have like an exam in a half year, and I've learned myself to read Braille music actually. And it has been pretty hard, and now I'm on my way to know how to use MuseScore and stuff like that. But the thing is that I'll be given a piece to my exam this summer where I have to learn. I'm a singer, so I have to learn the melody and stuff like that. But I don't know, how would you like do it, and how can you stay focused? And it's just, I just feel a bit like alone because no one can support me in this process. I don't know if it makes sense.
It does make sense. So just to clarify, the bit that you're worried about is that you're going to be given a piece of music and you have to learn it in a specific amount of time. Is it like a study?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's like Secunda Vista thing.
Right. Okay. And how long would you have to learn that piece, Maria?
Oh, I think the others are giving like 15 minutes, but I said to my teacher that I need more time, but I don't know how much time I need. Actually.
Okay. Well, we can probably have a chat offline because actually there's quite a lot to cover. But in basic terms, I would expect them to be able to provide you a Braille music file. There is a transcription agency in the Nota library in Denmark, so they should be able to use them and produce some Braille for you to take that exam.
Yeah, and they can use MuseScore as well, but
They
it's like
can.
the teachers doesn't want to use it.
It's a really tricky thing, because actually what really should happen is that they will have prepared this test and got it ready for you so that
Yeah.
you are able to take the test at the same time. And I would expect you to have somewhere in the region of 50% extra time. Obviously, as a singer, you can, if you don't often have to sing words as well, but if you have to sing words,
I do have to.
you do, right? Okay, so
Yeah.
you can either learn the words and sing the music, or read the music and remember the words, whichever comes most easiest to you. So to a certain extent, you've got a bit of an advantage. Obviously, a pianist would have to remember it, and if they get stuck, then that's kind of it. I would say, if there's any way you have of getting hold of the parameters of that test, so do they know how long it will be, and do they know what kind of music it will be? Because obviously memorizing some types of music is much easier than remembering other types, and I would hope that they would have followed a similar process over here. In about 15 years ago, ABRSM and RNIB worked together to produce and commission some diploma quick study tests which could be memorized by blind people. And that meant
I
that
don't
they
think they
had
do it here.
sort of recognizable musical forms. There was nothing in there to catch you out. They weren't kind of, they were all diatonic. They all were, to a greater or lesser extent, melodious and in kind of recognizable styles. That's much easier than having something completely abstract to remember.
This is something one teacher by himself make to the exam.
Yeah.
So I don't think there are any
So
rules.
maybe not.
Yeah.
So maybe get some files from Nota and practice your sight singing and practice learning, 16 bars in a go. How quickly can you learn?
Yeah, because I was so desperate, so I started playing organ to become a better sheet reader.
Okay, yeah. I suppose, a lot of us only tend to, and this is a really interesting point, actually. A lot of us only ever read the piece of music we're learning. And we don't often read music for pleasure or for study or just to see what happens. And I remember, must be about 10 years ago now, looking online at the library in Japan of the Braille Muse, the Braille Music support environment, it's called, or Braille Muse. And up there, they've got hundreds of orchestral and chamber music pieces to download. They're in Music XML, but you convert them online and download a BRF file. And I remember looking at the beginning of Mozart's 40th Symphony or Beethoven 5 and thinking, gosh, I've never, ever seen this written down. It was, I've got to my mid-30s, nominally a professional musician, and I've never seen this stuff written down. And that was quite an eye-opening moment, because none of us actually read as much music as do sighted people of our age who are studying. And that has big implications for how fast we can read, how much we can turn the Braille dots into sound, and how quickly we can do that, and how easy and fluently we can do that. And that's quite a challenge. So when you're doing the test that you describe, you've got to work much harder, because actually developing those skills has not really been very easy as a blind musician. So yeah, good luck, and feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Good luck.
And there's also the aforementioned email lists as well. So the Braille Music Chat and was it Blind Music Readers is the other one that I posted to this morning about this event. So you might find some advice in there.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to move on to a slightly a more light-hearted question, and it's an anonymous one again. And James, it's what's your funniest story relating to Braille music? If you've got one, or we can come back to that question.
I'll tell you what, there is one. Yeah, this was going back a long time. It's not strictly speaking Braille music, but I was giving a kind of, I suppose, a lecture recital. That sounds very grand. I was basically doing a recital and talking, but because I had so much talking to do and I'd written it, I wanted to read it. So I printed it all out in Braille immaculately. And I happened to be performing in a white shirt. And obviously I had the white Braille paper against my white shirt. And because I didn't have a lectern or a music stand or anything else like that, I was just sort of holding the Braille up to my chest. And afterwards, I came off the stage, and as happens, people came up and said, that's marvelous, thank you so much. And one man came up to me and said, it was only towards the end that I realized what you were doing. You were reading Braille, weren't you? And I suddenly thought, oh gosh, I wonder what you thought I was doing for the rest of the concert, just sort of randomly rubbing my chest. So yeah, my learning from that was to have a table or one of those music stands that you can put flat to put your Braille on, and it's much easier to read than trying to hold it against your chest. So yeah, that's the best I could do.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much for that.
But please share your own funny stories if there are any other funny stories of Braille. I hadn't really considered it as a avenue for humor, but that's great.
And one slightly more kind of philosophical one, potentially. It's from Pascalis, and I hope I've pronounced your name correctly there, Pascalis. And he is asking, I'm going to kind of phrase it around Braille music. So,
okay,
according to your experience, what type of device or digital tool do you think could be built to kind of solve a problem that hasn't been solved yet?
Ooh.
What would be your next area to develop, do you think?
Well, I wonder if it actually is being developed. I've just not seen many of them, but I think the whole idea of multi-line displays is the obvious avenue here. So if you want to look at what a score looks like, or even organ music that Maria's learning, or piano music, or whatever it is, having a Braille display like most of us have got is not really very helpful, because you've only got one line at a time. It's like one of those puzzles where you've got 16 squares and one of them's missing, and you can move all the things around, so you can only see what's behind one square at a time. So I think multi-line displays is an area that I'm interested in. I think everyone's interested in how feasible they are to produce, I guess, at a cost which will be affordable is another question, isn't it? Yeah, if you could wave a magic wand, that would be pretty close. And then I suppose ultimately, if you could have something which could scroll your kind of MIDI file, your Sibelius file, and your Braille at the same time. So as you scroll through the Braille, it scrolled the audio as well. That would be amazing, wouldn't it? Because actually, let's be really honest. Most of us find it quicker to hear a piece of music than we do to read it, and that's absolutely fine. But what I've tried to say tonight is that reading the music is really, really helpful for all the reasons that people have said over the 3 sessions. And if you could maybe synchronize your Braille and your audio, a bit like Daisy years ago managed to synchronize synthetic speech and text on a screen.
And I think I'm going to do some of the shout outs that we've got in the chat now. So we've got one from Sally Zimmerman, quite rightly.
Oh gosh, Sally's here.
Quite
no, I'm
rightly,
talking about her all day. Hello, Sally.
Giving a shout out to the live Braille in MuseScore. So that goes one way currently.
Yeah.
You can scroll through your music in MuseScore and get a bar at a time on your Braille display.
That is true. Yeah.
We're not quite there going the other way yet. But yes, it's so amazing just to have that live translation happening. Although it is fairly rudimentary at this stage. But yeah, it's where we are now is amazing.
That's really good, and actually, that it's really important that stuff like that happens. I'm a notoriously slow adopter of new technology. Okay, so the iPhone was kind of on version 10 before I even got hold of one, and part of that is because I'm no good at learning new technology, and part of it is because I've had to spend all my time doing the actual business of learning pieces, which have taken a long time. And I haven't really looked at the MuseScore thing, but it's really important that stuff like that is developing in the background, and it's great that people are helping with that development. And yeah, that's, I'm sure, something that will go on to develop, because they're really dedicated to this stuff.
Yeah, totally agree. And it's just really exciting to see how much that has developed in the last year or so.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm just going to work backwards through some of the chat now. So Ella, you've made some really great shout outs. You're talking about using Braille Orc and Hypeng and just the great service that he was able to offer.
I don't have too much to say or add to that, but just the fact that, the thing with Hypeng is that he transcribes full scores. So basically, you've got a symphony, but it's entire score. So the problem with that is it could be really great for score study, but I would say more commonly, you're that violinist or flute player or horn player who needs that performance part for your orchestra piece. And that's why I really like MuseScore.com. And one of the things that really frustrates me personally is that, yeah, sure, you can go to a Braille music library and find that, okay, yeah, this Symphony number 5 has been transcribed, but it's just the cello part. You know what I mean? So I feel like that can be a little bit of a drag sometimes, which is why I like notation software to Braille. So even though you do have to be more tech savvy to be able to extract something, I would say, like, what I like about Haipeng's thing is that, yeah, sure, the Braille scores its full scores, but I can email Haipeng. He's super responsive. And I've been able to get XMLs from Haipeng because he uses automated methods, which means I'm able to get XMLs for my performance parts, and it's been great. Also, I actually did request Haipeng's engravers to engrave a huge score for me because, like, it's more to make it available to everyone, but I've gotten the parts that I need, so it's been wonderful too. So I do want to say Haipeng has been fantastic to work with. That's basically what I want to say on that, I guess, if you wanted me to speak up about the service. But I would say that, yeah, his site has about 1,000 or so pieces. It's growing. It's best for those who play orchestral instruments, I'd say, bowed strings, woodwind, and brass. There are some piano things on there as well, but, like, I mean, there is vocal music, but I feel like his collection has the most utility for those who are playing orchestral instruments. I'm a little bit biased because I'm a violinist myself. I mean, I also play piano and viola. So
Brilliant.
Anyway, that was a bit long, but
No, it's great. It's great to put a voice to the name behind so many emails I've seen, Ella. So greetings.
Ella, I think you touched on something really good there as well, which I think, James, you touched on as well. We could probably make something bigger of, is working with a sighted musician potentially to do the music XML engraving, to do the music setting to XML or an engraving file, which actually a lot of musicians and a lot of sighted people who are involved in music stuff can do, and then taking it from that point onwards and doing your own conversion to Braille.
That's a big part of how I work now, to be honest. A lot of the pieces I'm asked to play or choose to play just aren't available. They're unlikely to be available on MuseScore because they're in copyright. It might be written. I mean, actually, another part of it is working with composers. You know, there isn't a file. They're writing in notation files anyway. So I'd say for a large chunk of what I do now is just receiving MuseScore files. And it's brilliant because people working in MuseScore are phenomenally quick. It's incredible how fast you can put things into MuseScore if you're an experienced user. And okay, it might not be absolutely perfect. There might be a bit of work to do, but actually it's far quicker than waiting, like poor Maria, 6 months to have her files sent halfway around Europe and back again. It can happen kind of overnight. And that's amazing. I mean, it's difficult now to go back to imagining when I was thinking about whether I wanted to study music, that what was in the RNIB library was what I could learn. And there wasn't really anything else. And if you wanted anything else, it was going to take weeks and months and cost a bit of money. And to have pieces now, like I said earlier, I've now got the problem that there's no way in my lifetime I'm going to have time to learn all the pieces I've now got access to. And that's a problem which is really it takes a bit of getting your head round, because for all of my life, it was the other way around.
And that's a great problem to have, right?
It is a great, yes.
While we're kind of on that subject, I just wanted to give a shout out as well to My Sheet Music Transcriptions, a company based in Spain. So they have been working as part of the AMPAG, Accessible Music Publishing Action Group, to make sure that their kind of engraving practices are by default accessible. So all the music XML that they produce, that anyone can contact them and commission, is ready to be translated into Braille. So that's another option that we haven't kind of spoken about yet. So another question, well, an implied question actually from Sally Zimmerman.
An implied question.
so Sally is saying more people need to know that Braille music exists, that there's still like a bit of a kind of lack of understanding generally. What can we all do together, do we think, to promote Braille music, I guess, outside of our circle? How do we raise the profile of Braille music?
Well, yeah, I mean, Sally and I have talked about this for decades. I don't think there's lots of ideas. I think actually it's really simple, isn't it? And it goes back to something I said right at the beginning. If all of the talk about Braille music is that it's difficult to get hold of, it's difficult to learn, it's really difficult to use, so I don't bother, then, people in audiences, people making funding decisions, people commissioning things don't think it's necessary, and they just assume that you'll learn by ear. So if you're doing a gig, whether you've learned 95% of it by ear or not, take a sheet of Braille, have it on a stand, use it to remember what your set list is, or what chords you need to start with, or, have whatever you need. I quite often now, not because I need it, but I quite often just have a sheet of Braille somewhere around me when I'm doing a concert, just for that purpose, just to have it visible. And I certainly have it in rehearsals. I never used to. I just used to turn up in rehearsals and just, work on hot air, basically. Now I work on hot air, but also I think it's really important for people to see. So when you do a concert with an orchestra or with a band or whatever it is, if everybody else is using music, why not have a sheet of Braille? It's amazing how many conversations that could start. And it's amazing where you go to with that.
So I just wanted to quickly raise a couple of issues regarding the promotional aspect of it. And I definitely think part of it, I feel like there is increasing awareness of Braille music, but I think that there are definitely some issues floating around. Like, I've definitely seen like directors will often be asking, I just got a blind student, now what? And I think that just the information about how to transcribe stuff in Braille, like, or just even just kind of learning to read Braille music notation, and a lot of that, I think that information, we definitely got a really nice bubble, but I think that we definitely need to find better ways to more directly connect with these other stakeholders, because I definitely think there's a real disconnect, and I think we can really do a better job of like maybe supporting those that are kind of out in the wild dealing with this, because part of it is that it's harder to like reach them because they don't know we exist and we don't know they exist to some degree. It's sort of a one at a time situation where, okay, well, you're a blind student and now you decide you're going to do school band, and now the school has to scramble to figure out what to do. So I think there's definitely that problem. The other is that I think the fact that we can't read and play at the same time, this can definitely be an issue. I personally feel like there's some issues around how that's framed. And I think recently, having joined a community orchestra, and I've been asked by a number of people why I memorize everything that I play. And I'm very upfront about it. And I say that like, in my particular case, I've decided that, I don't want to blame Braille music itself for this, because it's just the nature of tactile reading that you use your hands to read. You need your hands on your instruments, so you've got to memorize it. But basically, I've started saying that no matter how I learn, I have to memorize everything I play. It's just physically, there isn't really a way of getting around that exactly, except in certain situations, I guess. I think just better framing of this issue as well is important.
Yeah. Every time you go to a rehearsal, you speak with friends, you do a concert, whatever it is, you go to your choir, you're interacting with, 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 people. If they see you reading some Braille, whether it's music or not, they will take away the idea and they will remember you. They'll say, oh, there's this lady in our choir and she's amazing. She sings from Braille. She's got Braille. She reads all the words. They don't need to know much more than that. But if they then get asked by someone who directs a band saying, oh, I've just taken on a blind student, does anyone know? They'll say, oh, yeah, there's a blind lady in our orchestra. Why don't you ask her? Most people find information by word of mouth or Google. So if we can all be our best words of mouth, as it were, and, make it known in our network and talk about it in our networks and with our friends and use it in public and be positive about it. You're absolutely right.
And I think some of that is where Sound Without Sight slots in as well, as that kind of a bit of a beacon that we've designed the website so that it will be easy for Google to pick it up, and also like this session, for example, we're recording it and that will go onto YouTube as a video as well. So it's not just an audio only thing. It's something that can be discovered by mainstream audiences as well. When someone does get a new student and they need to find a breadcrumb trail to pick up. Hopefully this will be a useful breadcrumb trail.
I wish you told me it was on YouTube. I'd have had a shave and done my makeup.
But no, it's that kind of thing. I think it's representation in the mainstream, and that's why it's good to see MuseScore, for example, a very mainstream program, having Braille in the export menu, and just something that people see, a Braille panel on the window, and somewhere like musicteacher.com having an option to list Braille music code lessons.
Exactly. And it would be remiss of me not to do a shameless plug here, but I think it's very good, and it still seems to be watched around the world. There is a film on Braille music produced in 2017 by an amazing guy called Michael House, who is not only the loveliest man in the world, but also a really talented filmmaker. He's made lots of award-winning films and documentaries. He chose to do this one on Braille music, and we went to sort of retrace Braille's footsteps around Paris and told the sort of history of Braille music, but we also got an ensemble of blind musicians together to record a song written by a young blind composer, which we recorded, called Hope. It's a setting of Hope by Emily Dickinson, lovely poem, and it tells the story of how this ensemble got the score and learnt it and recorded it. So it's a kind of two-focused documentary, well worth a watch. I understand it's been translated into at least French and possibly Chinese and other languages, and is on Amazon Prime. So if you have Amazon Prime, you can watch it. But yeah, tell your friends about it and get them to watch it. Everyone has told me either they're incredibly polite or it's a really good film, and not all my friends are very polite. So
awesome. Well, we need to get the link to that in the handout.
Yeah, we'll put the link in the handout.
So we've actually covered most of the questions, or all of the questions we had in advance in one way or another, and there's not any more in the chat. So I'm just going to give people a final opportunity to put hands up. And
just before we do that, I was just going to explain, in the bottom of the handout, you'll see some links, and we haven't told you what the relevance is. We're going to play out, hopefully, with the last of them, which is a little Christmas offering of mine. There's one piece in here which is a good example of why I think Braille music is helpful, to illustrate the fact it's helpful for hearing things that aren't obvious to your ears. So it's a little out of copyright piece by the wonderful Diego Ortiz, and it's a couple of Spanish dances. I have the music in Braille. There's lots and lots in this performance on YouTube that you can't actually hear. We won't hear it now because it's a bit too long. But what we'll also do is share the Braille for it. So if you're interested, you can read the Braille and listen to the YouTube and see why it's a little bit dangerous only learning stuff by ear. So things like there's a 4-bar introduction that has randomly come into the video. It doesn't exist in the score. So if you turn up to play that with your student and you say, well, now there's 4 bars rest, they're going to look at you slightly curiously. It's in a different key. The whole thing repeats, which it doesn't in the score. So there's several things which just illustrate why Braille is quite handy just as a reference point, even if you weren't to learn the whole piece by ear. The Hannah Peel and Paraorchestra link I put in, we haven't had time to sort of talk about it, but it's a piece of music which is from an album. There's a recorder part in it, which I played, which on the face of it was really quite straightforward. If you turned up to sight read it, it would be no problem at all. A large part of it was a bass line, which had 3 variants, quite subtly different variants. They were 8 bars each. I looked at this score and thought, oh, crikey, this looks long, but it's fine. It's all manageable, easy dots. And then I realized that the bass line changed. And then because of the way it had come out of Goodfeel, the beginnings of each of the bass, which kind of repeated, were all over the place. So I immediately put them to the beginning of a line so that I could see and compare each of the iterations of this bass line. Then I thought, actually, I'm reading tons of paper, and in a rehearsal, it's just taking up too much space. I need a quicker way of doing this. So what I did, as an example of how you can modify your own score, I took the first variant and called it number 1, the second variant and called it number 2, and the third variant and called it number 3. And so instead of 16 bars of music, I just had number 1 space number 1. Then on another line, I had number 2 space number 3. So 32 bars of music was now 4 numbers, which A, I could remember much easier, and B, took up half the amount of space. So this piece of music went from 4 pages to 2, which meant that it was a single piece of Braille paper on a stand. And instead of having to remember hundreds of bars of music, I ended up having to remember a sequence of sort of 16 numbers, which I turned into football results. So the first one was 1-1, which was a 1-1 draw. Then there was a 2-3, which is a home defeat, and all that kind of stuff. So it very, very quickly turned from being quite a daunting prospect to actually quite easy. And the advantage was that if I needed a little aid memoir in rehearsal, I could quickly look down these numbers and, oh yeah, 1-1, 2-3, 1-3. Brilliant. Okay, I know what I'm doing. And all I then had to remember is where I was in my mind when I was playing. So that's an example of that. You can listen to the piece, you can hear the bass line, and we'll try and share the Braille for just that opening bit, and you can see what I did. So that's what those links are.
Amazing. Well, James, thank you so much for your time. Super, super interesting session.
Thank you. So I just wanted to share a little bit of Christmas spirit, because it's been a bit serious, really. So this is a little piece I wrote a few years ago. It is in Braille. You can ask me for the Braille if you want it. It's a little piece of recorder music based on a possibly recognizable Christmas carol. And with that, I wish you thank you for coming. Thank you for all of your really thought-provoking questions and comments and ideas. Have a wonderful Christmas and enjoy lots of music making with Braille. So thank you very much, and thanks, Jay.
Thanks so much, James, and here is your track.
Thank you.
Awesome, James. Thank you so much. What a great way to end the session. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sound Without Sight podcast. Sound Without Sight is a community-driven online knowledge hub, collating information and resources to support blind and partially sighted musicians and audio engineers to break down access barriers. If you're a visually impaired musician or audio engineer, why not share some solutions you found on our Knowledge Hub? You can learn more and get involved at soundwithoutsight.org. If you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, please consider making a donation to support the project. You can do so at soundwithoutsight.org/donate. The music you're listening to was kindly contributed by community member Mackie Jones of MapleMixProductions.com.